Hey, welcome back. You are listening to the Brown Perspective. This is RO, and I'm here with Eduardo. Hey, buddy. How you doing?
What's going on?
Hey, man. Just want to talk today about a topic that what has become known as the femicide nation, something that is still ongoing. Women um, dying at numbers that are alarming. You can call it a crisis. 1,000 women last year were murdered, and you know, because we live in the U.S. and I consume a lot of media, but a lot of it is American media. So I would hear about this in the background, but I never really dug into it as much as I did this time, so that we could have this conversation. And the my assumption was that whenever the femicides were referenced, I always thought that it was still linked to Juarez and the maquiladoras, and that this was back in the 2000s, and that was easy to understand because you had these maquiladoras that had set up on the border as a result of NAFTA, that and
Mhm.
so all of these American companies went in to the border. They set up all of these maquiladoras and then hired the Mexican population, pay them low wages, and then some shifts would end pretty late, maybe like 10, 11, and then you'd have to catch buses to go back to drop you off in your town. But sometimes the woman would miss the bus, or they were unreliable for whatever reason. They'd end up walking or having to wait for somebody to pick them up, and this was just a perfect place for someone that was out there stalking women, or an opportunist, even serial killers, to go out there and find easy targets. And so,
Mhm.
at least in that level, you can comprehend what was happening. And it was more of just a collective failure on the state not to provide safe transportation. And also, you can put blame on the industry of maquiladoras having shifts end so late. But when I was reading about this latest iteration, or at least this one that has bubbled up, because it's been happening, but this one that's bubbled up and we're hearing about it as a crisis, you're talking about states like Monterrey and Mexico City. And in Mexico City, they've even set up a separate unit to start investigating the femicides. And so, and what was shocking was that a lot of the times, the women, they're being murdered by those that are close to them, either a domestic partner or an ex. And at least from a documentary that I was watching, the there's times when the deaths are reported as suicides, and so what they're doing is they are going back and reviewing some of those to see if there was foul play involved, because the ex or the domestic partner murders the wife, buries her in the backyard or somewhere, and then reports them missing. Or if sorry, and that's the case, that's a different case. They might report them missing, or if they kill them and they're not hiding the body, they might just try to report it as a suicide. So definitely, those are a little bit more difficult to try to wrap your head around to understand what's really happening.
Yeah. And I mean all around is a sad situation because I know that so far this year, well last year, I know you mentioned that close to 1,000 women were murdered
Yep.
last year, and I think this so far this year in 2022, I think there are already more than 200 women who have been missing. So that's an average of about 6 women going missing every day, which is insane.
Yeah,
And
because
I
at that
think
rate,
that,
at that rate, it'll pretty much double from last year. So it'll be around 2,000, a little bit over 2,000.
yes. So, yes, I mean, definitely. And for me, it's important for us to talk about it because we do live in a machista culture. And and to me is just this crazy phenomenon of where we just celebrated earlier this month. We celebrated Mother's Day and then
Mm-hmm.
Mexican Mother's Day, which is on the 10th. And I feel that within this culture, there's this we idolize women, particularly our moms, our sisters, and those who are close to us. But then at the same time, this is happening to so many other women, and sometimes it is our own mothers and sisters who get impacted.
But that was the thing that had me thinking when I was reading about this earlier this week. You mentioned the machista culture, but we've always had a culture of machismo in Mexico and in Latin America. And while that certainly plays its role, I feel like that's been the constant. So something else must have changed, because otherwise we have to say that we have to be open to the possibility that the culture has become even more machista, perhaps as a pushback on women trying to assert themselves more and to gain more independence. So that's certainly a possibility, but there might be other factors at play. And so, and I say that the culture has always been machista, and I think back on my time when I was growing up in Mexico, and I grew up in a small town around 2,000 people, but we were surrounded by small towns, and each town had about 3,000, 4,000. I think another town had like 6 or 7,000. And if someone had murdered their wife or their girlfriend, you would have heard about it, because these are small towns and the news travels fast, right? So there's a kidnapping, or a young kid dies or something. Everyone in the towns would hear about this, and we never really heard about this back then. Not when I was growing up over there. It wasn't common. Even today, I don't know if it's very common in the small towns. So this is something that's affecting the bigger cities, or the urban areas, maybe the bigger poblaciones too, with like I don't know what the population would be, but you get to a certain number where you feel like maybe something else is going on. So I'm thinking, is it maybe that the culture has changed? Maybe I grew up in a small town. Maybe religion was still a lot more ingrained in the culture. Maybe we didn't have the social media, all of the other influences that you have now in the big cities. Maybe there's and I'm not a religious person, but I understand the unifying, the cohesion that it provides to a culture. So is it maybe that more and more people are becoming detached from the traditional Catholic religion, right? So there's so many different things, that like theories like in my head of like, hey, what's going on here? Because yeah, machista, but machismo has always been a constant. So what do you make of that?
Well, yes, and I think and machismo is not just a Central and South American thing. I think the patriarchy is strong
Yeah.
and alive here in the U.S. as well.
But in the U.S., you
Um,
have very specific consequences. So that's another thing that in Mexico, it might just be a result of people feeling like they can murder with impunity after years and years or decades of corruption, and the police departments being seen as corrupt, right? And not
well, same
solving
thing here.
murders
I
and so
mean,
forth.
you have cities that have incredible backlogs and rape kits and also and not only just women in large cities and towns, but you also have historically also had a lot of indigenous women and black women who are missing all the time. And I know just this past year there was a story about a missing white woman and how her case was very treated very differently um, to those of black women who go missing. So much so that actually I didn't realize that. I know we talked about Cinco de Mayo not too long ago, but Cinco de Mayo is also, or the 5th of May, is Murder and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Day. So I think as a way to try to bring attention
Yeah.
to that issue. It's unfortunate it's also in Cinco de Mayo because I think it kind of gets lost in that shuffle. But I think to your point, I mean, the biggest recent factor was the pandemic. And we know that being cooped up, not being able to go to work, and all the stresses of perhaps losing your job, spending time with that person, not having the opportunity to get away if you are in an abusive situation, um, contributed to the fact that you can see it, or that more cases are being reported, that is more visible. I mean, the thing with the church, not sure if that's what the factor may be, because in some ways
Well,
women and people, and it's thinking women because in some essence oftentimes they're the ones that have the less independence, less economic, moral independence to be able to leave a marriage. And particularly if you're a religious person, you don't want your congregation, you don't want your community to shame you if you leave an abusive husband. So I think that that part is complicated. Uh,
yeah, I was talking more generally about what you would describe as a breakdown in ethics, a breakdown in like morality, things that the church would try to instill in people. And I don't know, I suppose you could also make the case that it's if okay, so the church is not as present anymore in people's lives. So now women have more independence in case they want to get divorced. Maybe that's not doesn't have the same stigma as it used to. But what if that process of going through that divorce or actually divorcing your partner, what if that is also what would trigger someone? So I don't know if we can say that staying in the relationship is a danger in itself. Also, leaving could pose a threat, right? Or at least going through with the process of trying to leave someone and then
yes,
meeting
and
somebody else, and then that jealous ex husband or boyfriend trying to retaliate against you.
yeah, and the fact that not only can that happen, but if it does happen, the authorities are less likely to get involved to prosecute that person, whether it's here in the U.S. or in Mexico. So I think that that's the issue too. That's the whole system that is stacked against the women who is in an abusive relationship, because again, they their complaints, their concerns are not taken as seriously, or there's just a sense of complacency within the people who are supposed to keep them safe.
Yeah, and touching on what we said earlier, that you bring up a really good point that there's a different standard for American women that are murdered versus black or indigenous. So definitely, if we looked at those numbers, I'm sure it's the number of unresolved murders is higher in specific groups. I don't know how those compare to Mexico. We're saying we're on track to be 2,000 in Mexico for this year. I don't know what the percentage is in the African American community or the Native American community. I would still think that at least the United States still has a legal system that to a lot of people instills a sense of confidence that they still believe in the rule of law, even though we have all of the flaws that we have with the police system here. A lot of the flaws, people recognize them and point them out as stemming from systemic racism, and that the system is designed to favor certain individuals. Whereas in Mexico, there's a total lack of confidence. Not that the system itself it is racist. It has the like the caste system of the indigenous people in the bottom, then the mestizos and the whites. But apart from being racist, there's also a complete lack of trust, because it's just the systems are perceived to be so corrupted. And so if you're somebody out there that you're you have a girlfriend or a wife, or you're a serial killer or someone that's out there to hurt women, you have this sense that because of history, because all these murders go on, a lot of murders go unsolved, not just women but also men. You have this sense that you can kill with impunity, and you have a pretty good chance of getting away with it. So that slightly different dynamic going on in Mexico, and I imagine in other Latin American countries is similar.
Well, it's true, and I think I know El Hilo did a really good podcast and conversation or a report on the feminicides in Mexico. And one of the things that they do talk about is how, in essence, where there's that material, where there's that military response or that uptick in violence because of organized crime, that there tends to be an increase in feminicides too, right? So it could there may be a link, or there seems to be a link between the impunity that you have of men with money and guns who can do whatever they want, and the police who's too afraid to keep bring those men to justice,
Hmm.
in part because they can't, and maybe in some ways in those communities they know, well, the police are too busy trying to get the drug cartels. They're not going to worry about me or my domestic dispute. So I
Well,
think maybe that's a contributing factor that makes the
or
situation even worse.
or to say that the police are not even trying to get the members of the drug cartels, that they are themselves compromised and working with the cartels. So there's this total lack of faith. I'm not saying every single part of Mexico, but certainly you speak to your average Mexican and they'll tell you, yeah, these cops are likely in the pockets of the drug dealers, right? And then they call in the military, and the military is supposed to be independent. That's why they bring them in to places. But eventually the there's this perception that the cartels they do have ways also to getting through and corrupting some in the military to get their way, to get passes and so forth. But I don't know enough to be able to tell you what percentage boils down to the crime element in Mexico versus what part is just domestic abuse that turns fatal because again of this lack of consequences of men thinking that they can get away with it because they can get away with so much, right? They can do so much to a woman, short of killing her or physically beating or physically abusing her to the point where she ends up in the hospital. They can get away with so much before there's any intervention. So then uh, you can see that how that would lead to fatal consequences. Mm. But yeah, so at least we can talk a little bit about the bright side of this, that the women are organizing, and I would think that they're getting support from men as well that are interested in speaking up and making their voices heard. So there was a protest in Mexico City. I think AMLO is under pressure to try to do more, and so at least that's a good sign that the frustration has bubbled up to a point where there's women out on the street, and I think I saw a video where they were vandalizing cars and burning things because of the frustration. And although we don't condone violence, certainly sends the message across if that's what they're doing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an angry response. And remember that, I mean, just before the pandemic in Chile, there were protests as well. I know in Mexico, women were also organizing, and then the pandemic sort of put a chilling effect on that. But yeah, but I think that it's going to take not only the women to advocate for themselves, but also for us, right? The men in their lives to speak up against this and to support their fight. Because I mean, their fight is our fight, right? Because I think of all the women in my life and how it hurts, it would hurt if something happened to them, right? And just to feel that sadness that something could happen to one of my nieces, and it could happen just because they're women, right? And because some guy thinks that they can get away with treating women, that disrespecting women and doing, you know, and yeah, so it's just the type of issue that I think is going to take all of us to address and contribute towards.
Yeah, and it's also it's not something that you can fix with an executive order or in any in a manner that's fast and it's immediately effective, because I think there's a lot of deep systemic issues that have led up to this, and to try to reverse a lot of that is going to be difficult. I'm looking can try and put us on a path to get there, but ultimately it might take decades to, if those initiatives actually prove successful, it might take a while for us to see the results. I think for the time being, I hope that women uh, take better care of themselves. I hope that they try to understand that there's a real risk out there, and I think, like for example, the case with this murder in Monterrey. I think she was out partying, and she was going back to her hotel. So doing simple things like always being with someone else when you go back home, right? Being aware that, yeah, it sucks. It sucks being a woman, and I know obviously, I mean, we're men, so here we are, mansplaining, right? But or I don't want to mansplain, but I guess what I'm saying is it is difficult, and it sucks that women have to be on high alert, right? Because from their point of view, it's like, well, what the hell, right? We just want to be free. We want to do what we want. Why the hell do we have to take care of ourselves? Why do we like have to carry maize? It sucks that we have to do that, and yeah, it does suck, but that's the reality right now. And so, as we try to make progress, don't forget about the fact that you are still in danger, especially in countries like Mexico. Yeah, you can be upset at men all day long. You could say, well, these men should be in jail. They shouldn't do that. Yeah, I agree, but that doesn't mean they're going to stop. And as we fight for a better place for all of us, especially for women, just I hope that they are out there and they're mindful and they do take care of themselves, because yeah.
Yeah, and that we take care of them too. And I'm glad you acknowledged that fact too, that it's unfair that they're the ones that they need to be mindful to that extent. But I think there's the responsibility that we have, and it's that fine balance, right? Because it's not that they cannot protect themselves, but how do we contribute to a culture that is respectful and um, doesn't allow for some of the some of those things that are still happening. And I think it's crazy that in some ways Tupac has talked about it in his song "Keep Your Head Up,"
Yeah,
um, and so many others. But I think it's something that's going to take, again, it's going to take a societal response and to change that culture, to change the norms, that if you do attack a woman in that way, that you're going to pay the consequences
I agree.
for it.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, as you mentioned earlier, not that we want to say how do we protect them as men, how do we protect our women, because they are independent, they are strong, they are capable of standing up for themselves and defending themselves. It's more about how can we help their cause, right? How can we help them achieve their goal? It should be a collective goal, but ultimately, not taking the agency away from them, and reverting to a machista stance that we have to protect our women, right? Trying to strike that fine balance between being a supportive friend or a supportive partner without being patronizing.
Hmm.
All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up here. Definitely, I'd like to visit some of those other areas that I touched on, potential theories as to what's causing this. And as we read more, as we follow these stories, I think we can have a follow-up conversation to just to see if there's been more progress made. So hopefully there has. Any final thoughts?
No, and I think now with social media and a lot of a growing awareness, and I know that not too long ago we were talking about the Me Too movement. Again, we've been talking about some of the things that some of the progress that has been made has been brought about in Latin America around women's reproductive rights, that there's an increased awareness and conversation about this, right? Again, Bad Bunny did a song about Andrea, touching about a lot of these issues too. So I think there's just a lot of more awareness and conversations about it. So I'm glad that at least it's getting a lot more attention,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully that helps bring solutions to the table.
Yep. Well said. All right. If you all out there enjoy our content, make sure to check us out. We are Brown Perspective. Nos vemos.
Ciao.